Today, we take a look at John List, the American serial killer who slaughtered his entire family, his wife, mother, and 3 children, with the belief he was saving them from the financial ruin he was heading towards. John managed to escape, assuming a new identity and becoming a fugitive for nearly 18 years, even starting a new family, before he was finally apprehended in Virginia after an America's Most Wanted broadcast in 1989. Make sure to stay tuned into the end when we reveal one final obscure detail that shows just how much of a tragedy this truly was. Before we begin, please don't forget to subscribe below and click the notification bell. Thank you. John List was born on September 17, 1925, in Bay City, Michigan, to mother Alma Barbara Florence List and father John Frederick List. He was an only child. A devout Lutheran, List would go on to follow in his father's footsteps and become a Sunday school teacher in his earlier years, before enlisting in the U.S. Army, where he served in the infantry as a World War II lab technician. John was no dummy. Upon his discharge from the Army in 1946, he enrolled in the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, earning a bachelor's degree in business administration and a master's degree in accounting. But in November of 1950, the Korean War began escalating, and List was recalled to active military service at Fort Eustis, Virginia, where he met Helen Morris Taylor. Helen was an alcoholic widow whose former husband had been killed in action as an infantry officer in Korea. John and Helen got married on December 1st, 1951 in Baltimore, Maryland, and the couple moved, along with Helen's daughter Brenda, to Northern California, until John completed his second tour the following year and then moved the family to Michigan. First Detroit to work for an auditing firm, and then finally Kalamazoo, where he and Helen settled down and had 3 children of their own. By 1959, John had done very well for the firm and become the general supervisor of the company's accounting department. As Helen's alcoholism continued to spiral out of control, Brenda married and left the home in 1960, a decision she could have never known at the time that would eventually save her life. As John continued to advance in his career and get ever better jobs, the family, now minus Brenda, continued to move around. First to Rochester, New York to take a job with Xerox as Director of Accounting Services, and finally in 1965 to Breeze Knoll, a 19-room Victorian mansion at 431 Hillside Avenue in Westfield, New Jersey, when he was given a job as Vice President and Comptroller at a bank in New Jersey City, New Jersey. But despite the outer beauty of the Breeze Knoll mansion, the family was rotting from within, at least according to how John saw it. He was actually having critical financial problems and was worried for what it would mean for his family in the future. On top of this, he viewed his family as straying from their religious faith, something he could not deal with. You might think it will be time to cut costs and try to bring his family to church to try and solve these 2 problems. But John had a different method of resolution. In his mind, slaughtering his entire family would not only save them from dealing with the upcoming financial woes, but it would preserve their innocence and assure their souls a place in heaven. So on November 9th, 1971, John List meticulously and methodically murdered his entire family using his 9mm Steyr semi-automatic handgun and his dad's Colt .22 caliber revolver. He began his murderous rampage while his children were still at school, first shooting Helen in the back of the head, and then his 84-year-old mother Alma above her left eye. He then sat in wait until 16-year-old Patricia and 13-year-old Frederick arrived home from school, where he put a bullet into the back of each of their heads. John then made lunch. After driving and closing out both his and his mother's bank accounts, he went to Westfield High School to watch his elder son, 15-year-old John Jr., play a soccer game. Poor John Jr. played the entire game as his dad watched on from the stands, having no idea that his entire family had just been slaughtered and that he was next. The one person he should have been able to trust was planning his death. After the game, John drove John Jr. home. John Jr.'s death was different than his mom and siblings. Instead of simply being shot in the head, he was shot multiple times. Misfire evidence will later show this was due to him attempting to defend himself. God only knows what he saw or realized right before his father attacked him and took his life. John placed Helen and the children's bodies in sleeping bags in the mansion ballroom. His mother was left alone in the attic of her apartment. When finished, he sat down and wrote a 5-page letter to his pastor, stating within it that he saw too much evil in the world and killed his family to save their souls, leaving the note on the desk of his study. After cleaning the multiple crime scenes, John cut his own picture out of every single photograph that was in the house, called and canceled the milk, mail, and newspaper deliveries, sent notes to the children's schools and part-time jobs stating they would be visiting their maternal grandmother in North Carolina for a few weeks to explain their absence, turned the radio on to a religious station, and left his family for the final time. Well, at least this family, because John then went out on the run as a fugitive and would marry under a false name. Due to the family tending to be reclusive and unsocial, it took nearly a month before their bodies were found on December 7th. Neighbors had begun noticing that all of the mansion's rooms had lights on day and night, yet there was no activity in the home. When light bulbs began burning out one by one, neighbors called police, who first searched only the outside of Breeze Knoll and found nothing. Local residents believed that the List family had indeed decided on an extended vacation, so police just left. They were called to return to the house that night, however, and when they arrived, Patricia List's drama coach was standing outside the home, yelling her name, and he convinced the officers to enter through an unlocked window that led into the basement. The List family was found deceased in the Breeze Knoll ballroom. The case received widespread media attention, and a nationwide manhunt for John List began, investigating hundreds of leads without success. The search was made more difficult due to all reliable photographs of List having been destroyed by him. The family's car was found parked at JFK Airport in New York, but no evidence could be found that John had actually boarded a flight. Breeze Knoll remained empty until it was destroyed by arson 9 months after the crime in August of 1972, a crime that still remains officially unsolved. But John List was not worried about what happened to his former home. In fact, he was no longer even John List. After boarding a train from New Jersey to Michigan and then Michigan to Colorado, John settled in Denver in 1972, taking an accountant job under the name Robert Peter Clark, the name of one of his college classmates who would later say he had never even known John. As Bob Clark, John seemed to be living the life. He joined a Lutheran congregation and ran a carpool to it, eventually meeting ex-PX Army clerk Dolores Miller at a religious gathering and marrying her in 1985. 3 years later, in February of 1988, the couple moved to Midlothian, Virginia, where John, still under his assumed name of Bob Clark, resumed work as an accountant. But in May of 1989, nearly 18 years after the crime, a new television program that was in its first year featured the case. The program was America's Most Wanted, and the segment featured an age-progressed clay bust of what John List would look like currently. Forensic artist Frank Bender was spot on with his projections, and a former Denver neighbor instantly recognized the bust as his former neighbor that he knew as Robert Clark. He alerted authorities, and less than 2 weeks later, on June 1st, List was arrested at a Richmond accounting firm. But he held on to his story and alias for several months, even after extradition to Union County, New Jersey in late 1989. Finally, after being faced with undeniable evidence, including a fingerprint match to his military records as well as evidence found at the crime scene, John List confessed to his true identity on February 16, 1990. At trial, John testified that his financial difficulties had reached their peak in 1971, after he was laid off with the closure of the Jersey City Bank. Humiliated and unable to tell his family of his job loss, he got ready each morning, said goodbye to his family as if he was off to work, and spent each workday at the Westfield train station, just sitting and reading newspapers until his supposed workday was to end. As he was of course making no money in this time period, John was taking money from his mother's bank account to pay his mortgage and cover expenses, keeping up the facade. Eventually, when the situation came to a head, the patriarch of the List family had decided that between killing his family and accepting welfare, that welfare was the unacceptable option, because it would expose him and his family to ridicule. On April 12, 1990, John List was convicted of 5 counts of first-degree murder. He refused to accept direct responsibility for his actions, claiming incredibly, quote, "I feel that because of my mental state at the time, I was unaccountable for what happened. I ask all affected by this for their forgiveness, understanding, and prayer." End quote. The judge was hardly moved, saying it was now time for the voices of Helen, Alma, Patricia, Frederick, and John Jr. to, quote, "rise from the grave," and giving John a sentence of 5 terms of life imprisonment to be served consecutively. It was the maximum possible penalty at the time. John would eventually somewhat accept responsibility for his actions, saying, "I wish I had never done what I did. I've regretted my action and prayed for forgiveness ever since." In 2002, Connie Chung asked why he did not take his own life. John's response? Suicide would have barred him from heaven, and he was looking forward to being reunited with his family. Unbelievable. John List died on March 21, 2008, while in prison custody at St. Francis Medical Center in Trenton, New Jersey, due to complications from pneumonia. He was 82 years old. As awful as this case is, there is even one more detail that adds yet another layer of tragedy to this story. As you recall, the primary reason for John List killing his family, at least in his mind, was the financial trouble he was facing. What John did not know, as he laid his family at their final resting place in the mansion ballroom, was that the skylight right above where they were laying was a Tiffany original, with a value high enough to easily cover any financial troubles he was going through. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening, and please consider checking out some of the many other true crime videos on my channel. Please don't forget to both subscribe and click the notification bell so that you can be notified every time I upload a new video. I'm Jason Hebert, and I'll see you next time.
Okay.